Welcome to Road to Recovery.
Hello and welcome to Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents with Sagi Shaked. Sagi is founder of Shaked Law Personal Injury Lawyers and is ranked as one of the top 100 trial lawyers in the United States by the American Trial Lawyers Association. With a wealth of experience in personal injury, wrongful death, and complex litigation cases, he passionately advocates for victims and has recovered multi-million-dollar settlements in damages for his clients. I'm your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is Exposing the Truth About Truck Driver Hours, How HOS Violations Can Make or Break Your Accident Claim. Sagi, welcome back.
Yeah, excited to be here today. This is going to be a fun one.
All right. Well, let's start with the basics here. What are hours of service or HOS regulations, and why do they matter in trucking accident cases?
So hours of service regulations, this basically is one of the key components to every trucking case. So to get to understand what hours of service are, we got to backtrack a little bit. And it starts with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. So this administration was formed by the federal government because of the number of trucking crashes and fatalities that were occurring across the country. And so what they wanted to do is get together a body that can come together, come up with rules, and see if we can prevent these fatalities and catastrophic injuries from occurring, because there were no rules. Truck drivers were just driving as much as they wanted. The problem is when people drive too many hours or they don't get enough sleep, you have people not able to make the proper decisions. I mean, we've all known it. I mean, if you've been on the road and you're driving, you haven't slept well, your ability to make quick decision when you need to, your what they call perception reaction time, isn't as fast as it should be. And so if you're driving tired, you're fatigued, your reaction time is going to go down. So that's one of the premises is of why they started and put together these regulations. And one of the regulations is hours of service. So that's what, this podcast is specifically about. This specific episode is the hours of service and what limitations do trucking companies have that they must put on their drivers. And they have to monitor this. So they can't get away with saying, we didn't know how he was driving. You don't get away with that. You're putting these people
to know.
You're putting someone on the road who's driving 80,000 pounds. You got to follow that body of law. That's the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, which talks about what the regulations are. And that's one of many. I mean, we talked about in another episode, a regulation that requires you to put out warning devices when you're stopped on the road if you're a truck. So that's one regulation. This regulation for this podcast will be the hours of service, why they're important. So they're important because, again, they regulate the trucking industry on how long their drivers can drive. When do they need to take time off? When does a trucking company start? When does a driver start their hours of service? So that's the kind of stuff we're going to talk about on this specific episode.
Well, let's talk about the basic HOS rules that truck drivers need to follow. Can you kind of give us the overview of that?
Yeah, let me break it down. So after 10 consecutive hours off duty, a driver can drive up to 11 hours. Now, when we think about driving, your drive would start from the moment you start your pre-trip inspection. So it doesn't mean the moment you get in the truck and you drive. You've got to actually do a pre-trip inspection. You got to fill out the form. Sometimes it's electronic. Sometimes it's not. Now, what does a pre-trip inspection entail? It entails you going around, checking your truck, checking your wheels, make sure everything is good and everything works properly, because the last thing you want is a wheel to fall off or the engine not working properly. So the pre-trip inspection is important and should be done about every 150 miles. So you should do that. Not that you should do it. You have to do it. That's the law, right? So you can drive, after you take 10 consecutive hours off, you can drive up to 11 hours. So that's the first thing. Now, in a work day, you can drive up to 14 hours a day. But once you drove 11 consecutive hours, you need to take a break, right? So drivers are allowed, they cannot be on duty after their 14 hours on duty, even if they've taken breaks. So 14 is the max they can do in any one day. Now, after accumulating 8 hours of driving, they have to take a 30-minute break. So here's we're going to go through the rules, and then I'm going to give you some examples of what I've had in trucking cases. And the last rule we have is that a driver cannot operate more than 60 hours in 7 consecutive days or 70 hours in 8 consecutive days, depending on whether the company operates every day of the week. So those are the basic rules. So what happens is, why shouldn't a driver drive more than 8 consecutive hours? Think about it. Just the basics, like you got to go to the bathroom. I know for me, I can't go 8 hours unless I'm sleeping without going to the bathroom, because I like
No
to
way.
drink. You're drinking your tea, you're drinking your coffee. You got to take a pit stop here and there. So we had a case where this truck driver smashed into someone and then flipped over. It turns out, what did he have in his truck? He had a container, and in the container, it's like a jug. There was liquid, but it wasn't drinkable liquid. It was his pee.
Oh, no, no,
So
no.
the person was peeing as he was driving because he didn't want to stop, take the necessary break. And this is what happens. People's lives get changed. So that's just one example of how we knew, that he violated the hours of service, because if you looked at his books, he stopped. Everything was perfect, but we knew he didn't stop, because why does he have this jug of pee? It just didn't match up. And then we can tell that he drove from point A to point B and got there way too fast. It just didn't make sense if you stopped at all these stops, and the gas receipts didn't line up with what he was saying. So let's go back, just a quick summary of the rules. Again, after being off for 10 consecutive hours, you can drive up to 11 hours, but not in a row. You can do up to 8 hours in a row. Then you need to take a 30-minute break and then continue. Once you reach your 14 hours for the day, you got to stop. Okay. And then a driver cannot operate more than 60 hours in 7 consecutive days or 70 hours in 8 consecutive days. So it just depends on how many days they operate per week. So, and then they got to take a pause. And so these pauses are important because, again, we don't want drivers who are tired and fatigued on the roadway, because everybody relies on, people following the rules of the road. And so trucking companies and trucking drivers, their rules of the road are different than you and I, Kevin, and everyone listening to this podcast, because we're just regular drivers. We drive cars. We don't have these rules. We're not on the road all day long for our entire careers. They're on the road all the time. So they need to be adequately rested. If not, things happen. Unfortunately, bad things happen. So hopefully the trucking companies will enforce these rules, and you won't have to have lawyers like me who, specialize in these types of, crashes, truck crashes. But that's wishful thinking, because I've been doing this almost 25 years and we see it, week in and week out. I get these, horrific phone calls, from amputations to wrongful deaths to really horrible spinal injuries. I've had them all, and it's horrible to hear, and it really shouldn't happen if they abide by the rules, meaning the law. The law says you need to take these breaks for a reason, because our mind just doesn't work well after a while. And then obviously the rules there's rules and regulations about drug use. That's common sense. So we're not even going to address that here. But what we're talking about.
I would have thought that peeing in a milk jug while you're driving a big rig truck would have been common sense too. But hey, here we are.
Yeah,
we are. I know
here.
I don't want a tired truck driver next to me. I also don't want one fumbling around trying to relieve themselves while they're driving a 12-speed transmission,
Right. And 80,000 pounds barreling down the road.
Yeah. No thanks.
I mean, but it happens. It happens.
Yeah. That's crazy. How can the hours of service violations be proven in a trucking accident case? You mentioned doing some creative or looking at the gas receipts and things like that. Are there other ways that this can be proven?
Yeah, so they have these electronic logging devices where they keep track of every time the vehicle moves. The person has to sign in. Sometimes it's facial recognition, sometimes it's fingerprints, sometimes it's just good old signing in. And that'll keep track of the amount of hours a person is driving. So now we'll take that. So in the old days, they used to have, and some trucking companies like the mom and pops will have the old-fashioned paper, like they'll put it on paper, and that's the way they keep their logs. Nowadays, everything's going to, very, very modern. So they keep it, it's electronic, and we can tell. Now we're going to look at their electronic data recorder. We're going to look at their logbooks. We're going to look at their receipts. We're going to look at their dash cam. We're going to look at videos of when they pass certain tolls, videos of where the crash occurred. We're going to talk to witnesses, and we're going to see if all this adds up. We're also going to get their cell phone records, because the cell phone pings. So if you think you're able to fudge and get away with it with us, you're not going to be able to do it, because your cell phone pings everywhere you go. And we're going to get your cell phone. We're going to run a forensic examination on your cell phone. We're going to know where you were. So if you're playing with logbooks, if you're playing with gas receipts, if you're playing with anything, you're not going to be able to play with the forensic data on the cell phone. So think again, just tell the truth, and just remember, it's insurance money. We're not looking to hurt you, especially the driver. The company's got to enforce these rules. So if they enforce these rules, we wouldn't have a problem. If the driver's rogue, they should know about it. Why? Because they have, again, the dash cams that look interiorly. They'll tell you if someone is, wavering off the road, or, stopping short, or looks like they're a danger. So it's up to these trucking companies to do their job and ensure that only safe drivers make it on the road. So it doesn't impact anyone's families. I'll tell you, when I drive next to a truck, let me do it this way. I don't get next to a truck. If I'm coming near a truck, I try to either pass them or get far away from them. One, because there's too many blind spots on a truck. They can't see everything. And you're really at their mercy, because you get hit by one of these things, it's over. So I always try to stay away from trucks. If you're driving and you hear this, stay away from trucks. It's
too now after talking to you for all these episodes.
Yeah. And another thing we do is, we have the GPS data, the cell phones. We do inspections and the maintenance records, right? So everything, that's why I say it's so different than a car accident case and than a regular car accident lawyer. I mean, car accidents are easy to do. Trucking accidents, a lot different if you do them right? If you do it wrong, then everything's easy to do it wrong, or to do it half-fast. If you want a half-fast lawyer, then this isn't the channel for you, and I'm not the lawyer for you, because that's not the way we roll. That's not the way we operate. We want to get you max compensation for what happened. And to do that, you really need to know the regulations. This is just one set of the hundreds of regulations. And we'll talk about them as we go through the podcast on different episodes, different regulations that impact your case.
I think we just found our tagline. If you want a half-assed lawyer, you're on the wrong channel.
There you go.
That's our tagline for our show. So who's responsible if a trucking accident occurs because of an HOS violation?
So yeah, there's a couple of different parties when we're talking about hours of service violation. So obviously the truck driver, that would be number one. And number two, you would have the trucking company. And then you would also have the broker, because the broker to these trucking companies. So what happens is, just to put in some context, trucking companies have brokers that set up loads for them, right? And so the trucking company, their job is to put the trucks on the road. The truck driver's job is to drive. And then the broker's job is to find them loads and, from one location to another, and to make sure that they're always operating. So if they're leaving Miami and they're going to Atlanta, there's a load ready for them after they drop off that load, and to go from Atlanta to go to Texas. And they got them continuously operating and operating and operating. So now it's not only the trucking company that's responsible, but it's the broker. So the broker has to know these hours of service regulations as well, because they are considered, for purposes of what we do, they're a motor carrier as well, because they're scheduling these hours. And if we go back to what we said, if a driver is not allowed to drive more than 14 hours a day or 11 consecutive hours, and obviously taking a break, there's going to be a problem there if the broker is overscheduling them or putting them down a schedule that they can't handle. Why? Because they're violating the law. So you have the trucking company, the trucking driver, the broker. I would even look to the shipper, and anyone in the chain of putting that driver on the road is going to be responsible. You may have a maintenance issue, so I would look at the maintenance records. And really, this should all be laid out when you first meet the client. If you've handled these or gone to trial in these types of cases, you should know this. You send out your preservation letter. Don't just copy a preservation letter that you've done in the past. Every case is specific. Make sure you're sending out a specific preservation letter if you're the lawyer, or if you're doing this on your own, which I wouldn't suggest, because it takes years of knowledge and education and training and being in trials in the trenches to see what the mistakes are. So make sure that preservation letter hits all those things that you need to prove your hours of service violations. So there's a reason why we do everything, and that's one of the reasons for the preservation letter.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I imagine, like, if you can prove an HOS violation, that's going to make your case it's going to significantly help your case.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can prove the hours of service were violated, so that's sort of like what they would call a gotcha kind of moment, right? You violated the law. Of course, this crash is inevitably going to occur because the law says there's a reason why we have these rules. So people don't get tired. And now if you're violating the law, the inevitable happens. You're going to cause a crash. Now, also, if you can show a pattern as the attorney, if you can show a pattern of them violating hours of service regulations, now you can show that they're reckless. They're showing a gross indifference by ignoring the law and putting everybody's life at danger. So now you can get punitive damages. So what I would do is go through those regulations, and there's hundreds of them. And I would want to show every single violation of every single regulation to show this is a company that systematically violates federal law and state law. They ignore every single one of these regulations. And if you can list a bunch of them, now you have a jury that's going to be pissed off. You're going to have, obviously, your client's going to be pissed off because their life wouldn't have been altered if the trucking company didn't violate these laws. Right. But you're also going to have a pissed off judge, which nobody wants, right? And the judges, they're human too. They know when they see all these violations that this stuff should have never happened. These violations should have never happened if they simply followed the law. So what we want to do is gather as many of these regulation violations that they have and put them out there for the adjuster to see, for the defense lawyer to see, for the insurance company to see, and for the jury and the judge. That's kind of what our goal is when we're doing this. So you can really show the violations. Again, like you said, it's great for the case, but it also can be punitive damages as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, always great info from you, Sagi. And thanks to all you listeners out there for tuning in to Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents with Sagi Shaked. For more information or to connect with Sagi, visit shakedlaw.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe and review the channel. Sagi, always great to hear from you. Thanks so much for all the insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And if anyone needs help, we're here to help you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.